A couple of weeks ago, I read about a CEO named Paul Levy who heads a hospital in the Boston area. The hospital was losing millions of dollars and layoffs were inevitable. He was worried how this would impact the employees who could least afford it, like the housekeepers and food service workers. So Levy talked to his staff about the dilemma and his concerns, and he asked if they would be willing to make sacrifices in order to save these people's jobs. After he made his speech, the staff burst out in applause. Literally within hours, he had received a flood of suggestions and commitments from the staff to reduce costs. The upshot is that while he still had to make some layoffs, he was able to save hundreds of people's jobs. This is a really good example of a leader who has true empathy. What's also clear is that this display of empathy transcended his behavioral style. I have no idea what his natural style is, so I can't talk about how he is influenced by his style, but what he did resonated across many people and seems to have had a positive impact on the whole organization. So my point here is that when it comes to acting with high emotional intelligence, one of the lessons is that sometimes we need to make an effort to step outside of our usual behavioral style and comfort zone. This is why learning to act with high EQ can be challenging, but also why it has such an impact on ourselves and the people we work with. This example is admittedly somewhat unusual. Most managers and leaders won't find themselves confronted by this sort of situation and decision. But what I think it gives a good example of is a person who transcended his own behavioral style. He was simply so genuine and so caring in his outpouring of empathy that this transcended his own style, and no matter what the behavioral styles were of his staff, they all interpreted this as being a sign of a great leader. Finally, let's move on to the fourth part of the model. Relationship management is where these three skills all come together. This is the most visible aspect of a person, and in particular leaders. This is where you see skills like conflict management, team building, and influencing others. Leaders with good skills in the first three areas of EQ will usually be effective at managing relationships because they're attuned to their own emotions, and this means that they'll approach relationships in an authentic way. It's not just being friendly, but it's what Goleman calls friendliness with a purpose, motivating people in the direction you desire. These people are very good at developing networks, not necessarily because they're highly sociable, but rather because they understand that nothing gets done alone and they're skilled at being able to work with others. Once again, behavioral style can heavily influence how people manage relationships. Take, for example, conflict management. We can all think of situations where conflict is likely to occur. If people are stressed out because of deadlines and limited resources, this has high potential for conflict. Not surprisingly these days, the stress that people are feeling from the recession is leading to an increase in conflict at work. Learning about emotional intelligence in a general sense can help a person to reduce conflict. Empathy is a critical skill here because it involves the ability to sense that a person is feeling tense. However, people with different behavioral styles display their tension in unique ways, and this is valuable information for understanding how conflict arises, how to recognize it, and how to manage it productively. Some behavioral styles display tension in very obvious ways, while others are not so obvious. People who have what we call here at TRACOM a driving style, for example, will become very impatient, animated, and vocal when they're heading towards conflict. They're going to let you know that there's a problem. On the other hand, people with what we call an amiable style will often become less assertive when they're upset, and they may actually respond to tension by acquiescing to the other person. So even though by outward appearances this type of person doesn't look like he's in a conflict, he definitely is. And even though he's acquiesced, the conflict is still very much alive and active for him. So it's critical that people use empathy skills, but it's much more valuable and useful if these skills take into account people's natural styles and ways of acting, because this is how you can use your empathy skills much more effectively. So here are a few key points to think about when putting emotional intelligence to work in your own organizations. The first is really that EQ is not generic. It doesn't work as a one-size-fits-all approach for every person in every situation. What's really key here is to understand that your own behavioral style influences your EQ behavior. People of different styles behave in different ways, even when they're showing the same EQ skills. And along with that, people of different styles will interpret your EQ behaviors in different ways according to their own styles. So it's very important to keep these things in mind and to understand that different style behavioral differences will influence emotional intelligence in very important ways.
Thanks, Casey, for summing that all up and putting it together for us. So if I were sitting in the audience right now, I would want to have the question answered, what evidence do you have that they are in fact related? And what evidence do you have that by doing the two together, you do in fact get better impact in the workplace?
Thanks, David. Well, let me just address those questions right now. As some of you may know, here at TRACOM, we are experts in interpersonal effectiveness training going back for quite a few decades now. We've built the leading model of behavioral style that we call social style, and as part of that model, we measure how effectively people work with one another. We call that part of the model versatility. What we've found is that people who apply knowledge of social style and versatility skills have shown big improvements in a variety of ways, such as sales performance, team leadership, conflict management, and general leadership effectiveness. Today, we're going to share the results of some brand new research that shows a strong connection between emotional intelligence and our measure of versatility.